Today, January 21st, is the first day of a Super GM tournament in Wankande, Netherlands. We're going to analyze three most interesting games of the fourth round, and we're going to start with the game between Fabiana Caruana and Anish Giri. Fabiana Caruana is an American Grandmaster who is the second best rated player in the world, and Anish Giri has been a top 10 player for a long time, but currently he is 22nd in the world. He represents Netherlands. And Fabiana Caruana starts with the move e4. Anish Giri plays c5, and we have a Sicilian defense. Knight f3, developing the knight. Knight c6, bishop b5. That's called Rasalimo variation of the Sicilian defense. Very popular in the past, I would say 20, 30 years. G6 to develop the bishop on a very promising diagonal a1, h8. White plays short castle, bishop g7, rook e1, and e5. That's a standard variation of this Rasalima defense. In this particular position, white takes the knight on c6. And although the bishop is considered to be a little better than the knight in most positions, especially when the board is open, this is an okay move because that allows white to have an advantage of double pawns for the black. So those double pawns are a problem, and but the black has two bishops, although one of them is currently stuck by its pawn on d7. White plays c3, preparing the break pawn on d4. Knight goes to e7. In this position, so it goes to e7, not to f6, because at some point black has an idea to play f5 and have a break pawn break on the king side and opening the file for rook on f5. d4, continuing with the idea of breaking in the center and controlling the center for white. Exchange the pawns on d4, and after all these exchanges, black castle short side. So in this particular position, obviously was played many times on any high level, um, on grandmaster level, and this position is considered a little better for white, but black has basically no real problems in this position. They have a very strong bishop on g7. The knight is not that good, but eventually it will get to a better squares. The biggest problem in this position right now is the bishop on c8 that has no moves, uh, except for going to another diagonal which is closed right now. So the white plays knight c3, developing the knight, bishop b8, which is a smart move, attacking the pawn on b2 in case the bishop goes developed on, let's say, f4. So you cannot move the bishop right now from c1 because the pawn on b2 becomes not unprotected. So therefore, knight b3 going back, defending this pawn. So now the bishop on c1 can move. Black goes queen c7, and that is a good move to prevent white to putting the bishop on a very nice square on f4. So therefore, the bishop goes to g5, attacking the knight on e7. d6 is the best way to protect that knight from capturing. It's protected now by the queen. Rook c1, putting the rook on an open file and starting to put some pressure on the pawn c6. Bishop e6 just developing a piece. And nice move, knight d5. Knight d5, a little tactical move. You cannot take the knight with the pawn because your queen would be captured. And therefore, black takes it. And now also the knight on e7 is under attack by two white pieces. So therefore, Anish Giri takes the knight on d5 with the knight. And after e takes d, it feels like white's position is very promising. Because the bishop is under attack, the pawn is under attack. And if you, let's say, play bishop d7, White just takes the pawn here, and you can't take it back because this pin is deadly. You will not be able to save your bishop. Or if you are able to save your bishop, you're gonna sacrifice in other places of the position. So this position would be winning for white. Therefore, in this particular position, there is only one move that saves black. And that move, Geary, I'm sure, knew about that move before this game even started. And the reason I'm telling you this, because this move rook b5, after this move rook b5 is made, Anish Giri has 1 hour, 43 minutes and 7 seconds on his clock. A reminder, the game started when Anish Giri, when both opponents had 1 hour and 40 minutes. So in this particular play, this particular move number 17 for black, Giri has more time on his clock than he started the game with. That means that all this was on his computer in preparation for this game or for other games. So he knew all these moves by heart. And after rook b5, d takes c6. So d takes the pawn takes the bishop. And now the whole idea of the move rook b5, that after the bishop on e6 is captured, the rook on b5 can capture the bishop on g5. And black's position is totally fine. White plays a queen d2, attacking the rook on g5. Black goes to f5, protecting the rook. Exchange the pawns. Now the black has 3 pieces attacking the pawn on f2, and white has only 2 defenders, so they need to activate a rook to protect the pawn on f2. And at least visually, it seems like black position is a little better. They also have a big advantage on the clock. By the way, what I mentioned before, that black had 143 on the clock and started the game 140, that means that the time control after each move, you have 30 seconds added to your time. So therefore, when you make your moves quickly, every time if you don't really think, and here he didn't think for the first 17 moves, he actually accumulated more time on his clock. c5, because the pawn was under attack by the rook. g3, that's a prophylactical move to make sure that the white king has movement in the future. Now the reason h3 is not as good is because black has a black squared bishop, and in some positions, if let's say it would be on e5, the square in h2 would be taken by the bishop. So when the opponent has a black squared bishop, in most cases it's better to play g3 instead of h3. Rook d5, attacking the queen on d2, so the queen has to go away on c2. Rook goes to e5 and exchange the rooks on e5. And in this particular position, I think both opponents, very strong grandmasters, decided that the position is even. To play this for a win would be wasting time and energy, and they made a number of quick moves back and forth, and in this position they agreed to a draw. They agreed to a draw. It's an even material, it's an even position, and both players decided to save some energy for the next round. The next we're going to look at was more exciting, and it's played by Arjun Erigaisi, who is an Indian grandmaster, and he is ranked 4th in the world. 4th. And only 4 players in the world has the rating of over 2800 at this particular moment. First is Magnus Carlsen, second Fabiano Caruana, American Grandmaster. Third is Nakamura from USA, and fourth is Indian Grandmaster Arjun Arigasi. But this particular tournament is not going well for him. He only made 1 draw so far in 3 games and lost 2 games. So he had only half a point out of possible 3, despite the fact that he is 4th best player in the world. He played against Vladimir Fedoseev, who is Russian grandmaster, but currently represents Slovenia. Also one of the top grandmasters in the world. I think currently he is ranked 26 in the world. And the Indian grandmaster starts with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, bishop e7. That's a queen's opening declined because the pawn on c4 was not captured. And if it was captured, that would be queen's opening accepted. Now, this is all theory, of course, and Indian grandmaster decided to go for an exchange variation, taking the pawn on d5, which is more peaceful variations. In most cases, actually, white prefer to keep pressure in the center, but in this particular case, he decided to exchange the pawns. Next move is logical, developing the bishop on a nice square on f4, and black immediately counterplay with bishop d6 because this bishop on f4 is kind of annoying, putting the pressure on the pawn on c7. So bishop d6 immediately played, e3, and in this particular case, white knows that if bishop takes f4, e takes f4, despite having double pawns, this position would be okay for white because they would have a great square on e5 for its knight. Nevertheless, black takes the bishop, e takes f4, castle, and knight goes to the square it wanted to go all the way, all along, on e5. Very strong knight. Black immediately start attacking this knight because to have this knight in this position would be problematic for the rest of the game. So knight c6, f3. f3 is the move to protect the square e4, so the black knight cannot go there, cannot activate. Bishop e6, queen d2, hinting that white would like to castle alongside and start attacking black on the king side. Black plays knight takes e5 because they couldn't take this knight any longer there on e5 square. Now you can take the knight with the pawn from d4 or f4, and either move is fine. The only thing is that they accomplish different objectives. If you take it with the f pawn, your objective is undouble your double pawns. But if you took it with the d pawn, as the grandmaster did, you're opening the d file for your pieces and starting attacking this pawn on d5. The knight is under attack, so it has to go back along castle as promised. Now here is one important thing. In this particular case, this pawn was under attack by two white pieces, and the reason knight takes d5 wasn't good because there is a tactical move, knight takes e5. So you take the pawn back, and this knight becomes attacked by two pieces. So this position is actually better for black. The reason it's better for black, the king is very protected on g8, and the white king is in the middle of the board. So therefore, first, long castle. Now three pieces are attacking the pawn on d5. Now it has to be protected by the move c6. White plays g4, immediately starting a monstrous attack on the king side. The threat is f5, and the white squared bishop will not have any moves. So black immediately has to counter this with the move f5 themselves. Pretty much the only move in the position. And here, knight e2. Knight e2 was played in order with the idea to put it on a nice square on d4, but that was a mistake. The best variation, the continuation for white, was to move the rook to g1 to the open file, and it was a more aggressive approach to this attack. After knight e2, black takes the pawn. White continues with their plan to put the knight on d4, very nice square, attacking the unprotected bishop in e6. Queen e7 protects the bishop. Now they play rook g1, a little late. Black continue to take pawns. White do not care about pawns in this position because their objective is to attack the black king. Bishop d3. Another white piece is joining the attack on the black king. And black's position looks visually kind of dangerous, but in reality, it's easily defendable. Unless you play king h8, which wasn't the best move in this position. The idea was clear, just to move the king away from the open file G. White plays a very subtle, nice move, bishop c2, with the idea to put the queen on d3 and have a battery of the bishop and the queen attacking pawn h7 with a checkmate potentially. c5 is another mistake. The reason it's a mistake because it basically helps white with their ideas. It would be nice to put the knight on g5 to attack the pawn on h7, and move c5 basically helps white to accomplish that. Knight takes f3 and knight b6. Fedosеев is playing kind of on the wrong side of the board here. The action is on the king side and he needs to protect his king, and somehow all his moves are on the queen side of the board, c5, knight b6. He really underestimating white's attack. And here is a very nice move, rook g5. It's multi-purpose move. Main idea is to play a5 because now it's supported by the rook. The square is supported by the rook and by the bishop. So after f5, black's position becoming very, very dangerous. The other idea is to double the rooks on file G and attack the pawn on g7. Very nice move. Knight c4, some counterplay by black. Their position is much worse, but they're trying to confuse things. So to make sure that they just don't sit and wait, they started attacking. Attack the queen. The queen has to move away to d3. There is a checkmate on h7. That's a threat. g6 is pretty much the only move. Knight h4. Knight h4. So now 4 pieces are attacking this pawn. And white are ready to sacrifice the knight on g6 and create a checkmating attack. So this pawn has to be protected with queen f7. Another move, rook f1 right now just has to be played because this pawn was under attack. You cannot allow black to take the pawn on f4 because it's a double check. It's check with a double attack on the rook and the king, and you're gonna lose the rook, so you have to play rook f1 to protect the pawn on f4. Rook g8, another protector of the pawn on g6. Queen g3. Another move to continue attacking the pawn on g6, and white again are ready to sacrifice their knight there. Now 4 pieces are attacking this pawn on g6. Black plays bishop f5, probably the only move. And here, the easiest move of the game and the winning move of the game was knight takes f5. Easy move to find, probably for a player of any rating. And for some reason, in this particular position, it showed that Erigaisi, again, one of the strongest players in the world, is really not in good form. He plays bishop takes f5, and that's a mistake. Takes, and now the biggest mistake of the game, knight takes f5. So he had to capture the knight, the bishop, the black bishop in a different order. First knight, then bishop, and he is winning. In this particular case, he missed a tactical shot by black. Queen takes f5. Great move. Now, queen takes f5, rook takes f5, rook takes g3, h takes g3, and what he probably missed was the next move by black, which obviously Fedosеев saw ahead of time, and that move is easily knight to e3, and that's a double attack. And what's worse, that the rooks, the white rooks, are not connected with each other because the pawn on f4 is on the way. Therefore, white loses the whole rook here. They cannot even take back in any direction because they have 4 pawn. So white goes to g5, knight takes f1, and black has an extra piece. An extra piece for in grandmaster level is a win. Now, these pawns are kind of dangerous. They look dangerous, but it's not a big deal. e6, knight goes back to defend the position, attacking the knight with the move rook e5, d4, protecting the knight. Rook takes c5, not a problem for black, b6, attacking the rook again, rook h5, king g7, kings goes to make sure that white pawns cannot move anywhere, just to protect it. And in general, in the games, you need your king to go to the middle of the board. King d2, rook e8, f5, rook, king f6, rook takes f7, h7, king, knight takes f5, and after this couple of moves, white resigned. White resigned because they don't have a piece, and eventually this pawn b will probably queen. And again, this position is easily won on a grandmaster level. One more game we're gonna take a look today, and that's a game between Pendula Harikrishna, an Indian grandmaster, and representative of the host nation Netherlands, Max Warmerdam. And white starts with the move knight f3, d5, g3. That's after c5, bishop g2. That's kind of Catalan variation. Every time the bishop goes to g2, very popular opening for white. Positional usually leads to a positional game. d4, knight f6, castle, e6. Very standard theoretical position. And here the move c4. c4 not the move that usually is played in this type of position. Usually it's more of c3, and then bishop goes to, let's say, f4, e3. So it's more positional approach. c4 is more aggressive approach to this position, so the game becomes more interesting right away. There is an exchange of pawns. There is an exchange of queens. White's position is a little more pleasant, and the reason white's positions are better, white is usually better in those type of structures, is because of this bishop on c8. Bishop of c8, it doesn't have many ways to get into the game because of the pawn on e6. So there is no really there is not a good square for this particular bishop. And after bishop takes c5, knight d2, b5. b5 is the move that is very provocative. Very provocative move by the Netherlands grandmaster. Normally, you don't want to open up the diagonal for the very strong white bishop here. Not only you don't want to do this, this move loses in exchange for white, for black. I'm sorry, because after knight e5, the knight is attacked twice. So you have to move it. You have to take this knight, and bishop takes a8. So white can have an extra exchange in this position. But the position still is not very clear because black pieces are very active. The pawns are extended. So it's really not the move that easily calculated ahead of time. Now, the reason why I didn't play e5, my understanding is that Hare Krishna was afraid of Wonderdam's preparation. Wonderdam played this move so quickly with 1:43:48 on the clock, which means again that he was not thinking at all for the first 23 moves. And I'm pretty sure that when you play so quickly, you prepare this at home. So Hare Krishna was afraid that this is some sort of home preparation and decided to play the other way, a4, attacking the pawn. Bishop a6, kind of a strange way to defend this pawn, but at least now the white squared bishop for black is doing something. White plays knight g5, opening the diagonal for his bishop. And the knight on c6 is under attack. Knight d5, knight e4, attacking the bishop on c5. Black plays bishop b4, protecting the bishop. And here is a great move, a sacrifice of the knight on f7. Totally unexpected. Unless you had this position prepared ahead of time. So knight takes f7, king takes f7, and knight g5 check. So in this particular position, white is without a piece. It's two bishops against two bishops, but only one knight against two knights. King goes to the middle of the board to f6. And another sacrifice. Knight takes e6. Another sacrifice, but this is already easier to understand what's happening here, because this pawn on d6 was protecting the knight on d5. So now, after knight takes e6, if king took the knight on e6, then there is a capture on d5. Knight takes e7, protecting the knight. AB, bishop goes to b7, so now the knight is fully protected. Knight from e6 goes back to d4 because it was not protected. King f7. Rook a4, interesting way to attack the bishop on b4. And now the bishop on b4 is actually under attack because after rook takes b4, knight takes b4, bishop takes b7. So that's a threat. c3. Very interesting move. After c3, it turns out that if you take the bishop right now here, knight takes b4, bishop takes b7, there is a move c2, which is very important intermediate move. And if let's say the rook goes away to e1, after rook a d8, black's position is better, despite the fact that they don't have a piece. So therefore, after c3, white goes rook d3. Crazy stuff is going on the board. Let's not forget that white still don't have a piece, and black have an extra piece, and still the position considered even. a5, one more defender for the bishop on b4. B takes c3, bishop takes c3, rook f3 check, and here black plays a move that lost the game for them. So everything was fine till this moment. You just go back, king e8, and nothing is a problem. And all of a sudden, a grandmaster with a rating of 2646 decides to go back, to go up front with the king to g6. Not sure why. So to g6 it went, and the game is lost. And the game is lost because of the next move, knight c6. And turns out that this rook on a4, so that move that was made some time ago, rook a4, was really a great move because now the rook is joining the attack on the king. And the king is cut off on file f. So after rook g4, there are some checkmating ideas here. So knight c6. Bishop goes back to f6 with the idea that the king now can move to f7, can move back, and here knight e5 check. An absolutely great move that maybe that's the move that Wonderdam didn't see ahead of time. This is a great sacrifice of the knight, and the reason Black resigned here is because after you take the knight on e5, we have rook g4 check, king h5, rook g5 check. The only move is king h6, and this is deadly. Rook takes on e5 with the check from the bishop. Let's say, so the only move. King g6, rook g5. I'm going back. Now you see again, the king is cut off. After he goes back to h6, another move, another piece is taken by the white, and again with a check. And in this position, white has total domination. It has two extra pawns on top of that, and computer says that there is a checkmate in 7 moves. I'm not sure that Indian grandmaster had this in mind and knew how to checkmate here in exactly 7 moves, but it doesn't matter. It's a totally winning position. So this was round 4, and we're gonna stop here and come back tomorrow with the games of round 5. Thank you for watching.